To accurately capture the depth of the Ponca heritage, it is essential to trace their ethnogenesis and linguistic roots. The Ponca share deep social, linguistic, and cultural characteristics with the Omaha, Osage, Khoi, and Quapaw peoples. Collectively, these tribes constitute the Tegiha branch of the broader Siouan language family. Historical evidence and rich oral traditions passed down through generations indicate that the Tegiha-speaking peoples did not originate on the Great Plains, but rather in the eastern woodlands. Specifically, the Ponca and their linguistic relatives inhabited the Ohio River Valley in areas encompassing modern-day northern Kentucky and southern Indiana. Over centuries, complex environmental shifts, potential resource depletion, and shifting demographics among neighboring eastern tribes prompted a gradual, highly coordinated western migration. By the period spanning 1200 to 1700, the ancestors of the Ponca had migrated steadily westward, settling in critical pre-contact indigenous trade centers such as Pipestone and Blood Run, located near present-day Sioux Falls, South Dakota. Following their tenure in the Sioux Falls region, oral histories suggest the tribe moved through the Black Hills, near the Bighorn Mountains, and into Rapid City, South Dakota, before ultimately orienting toward the Missouri River. The sheer geographic scale of this multi-century migration eventually fractured the larger Tegiha group into distinct tribal entities, as different bands chose different settlement sites along the Missouri River basin. The Ponca are believed to have officially separated from the Omaha tribe prior to the dawn of the 18th century. As an independent sovereign entity, the Ponca, referred to traditionally as the Usni, Cold Ponca, established permanent and semi-permanent settlements along the Niobrara River and Ponca Creek, near the Missouri River's confluence in present-day northeastern Nebraska and southeastern South Dakota. Specific settlements included areas known today as Ponca, Niobrara, Lynch, and Veradale. In this transitional ecological zone, where the eastern woodlands yield to the western plains, the Ponca developed a highly sophisticated dual subsistence economy. They constructed permanent earth lodge villages and cultivated extensive horticultural plots, growing corn, beans, and squash along the fertile riverbanks. Concurrently, they engaged in seasonal, nomadic bison hunts on the Great Plains, utilizing the vast buffalo herds for meat, hides, and bone tools. This adaptive flexibility allowed them to thrive and established a profound, sacred connection to the geography of the Niobrara Valley. For the documentary narrative versus visually establishing this dual existence, the stability of the earth lodge against the mobility of the buffalo hunt will provide critical context for the devastation they would later experience when separated from this specific landscape. The arrival of European explorers and American expansionists fundamentally disrupted the demographic and political stability of the Ponca. The earliest recorded European contact with the Ponca occurred in 1789, when Spanish traders encountered their villages along Ponca Creek. However, the most famous early American encounter was largely a missed opportunity. When the Lewis and Clark expedition, the Corps of Discovery, traversed the Missouri River region in 1804, they learned of the Ponca, noting them as a small tribe living on the west bank of the river and along the lower Niobrara. However, Lewis and Clark never actually met the Ponca leadership face-to-face, as the entire tribe was away on a seasonal westward hunting expedition at the time of the explorers' passage. Prior to sustained European contact, the Ponca were a geographically concentrated and culturally robust population. However, the introduction of Eurasian infectious diseases, against which indigenous populations had zero natural immunity, initiated a demographic collapse. Smallpox and other foreign pathogens swept through the Ponca villages in the late 18th and early 19th centuries, causing staggering mortality rates. The sociological and structural impacts of these epidemics were catastrophic. The sudden loss of elders disrupted the transmission of oral history and religious ceremonies, while the death of young adults severely weakened the tribe's agricultural productivity and military defense capabilities. The cyclical nature of these epidemics forced the Ponca to constantly adapt their societal structures to accommodate the loss of entire kin groups. The demographic data below illustrates the drastic fluctuations in the Ponca population during the 18th, 19th, and 20th centuries, tracking their devastation by disease, their partial recovery, and their subsequent splintering following forced removal. This demographic vulnerability heavily influenced the Ponca's geopolitical strategy. Unlike more populous, highly militarized neighboring tribes like the Sioux, the Ponca, acutely aware of their diminished numbers, consistently pursued diplomacy, trade, and peaceful coexistence with the encroaching United States government. The geopolitical landscape of the Great Plains during the 18th and 19th centuries was characterized by immense volatility, driven by both intertribal conflict and American colonial expansion. As powerful equestrian tribes, most notably the Teton Sioux, Lakota, expanded their territory westward across the Missouri River circa 1750, the Ponca found themselves geographically and militarily squeezed. The Sioux expansion was largely driven by the pursuit of buffalo herds and control over lucrative trade routes, bringing them into direct, often violent, competition with the sedentary Ponca villages. In response to these pressures, the Ponca maintained a steadfast posture of peace toward the United States, hoping to secure a powerful military ally. The Ponca never waged war against the U.S. military. This alliance was formalized early, with the Ponca signing their first official peace treaty with the United States in 1817, which was quickly followed by a comprehensive trade agreement in 1825. As the 19th century progressed, the philosophy of manifest destiny drove the United States to secure the Great Plains for white settlement, railroad expansion, and the safe passage of pioneers traversing the Oregon and California trails. In response to mounting aggression from the Sioux and failing agricultural yields due to regional droughts, the Ponca engaged in a series of desperate land cessions in 1858 and 1865. Under the provisions of the 1865 treaty, the Ponca ceded roughly 30,000 acres of their ancestral land. In exchange, the federal government explicitly agreed to recognize and protect the remaining Ponca reservation, providing military protection against Sioux raids, economic assistance, and the guarantee of a permanent 96,000-acre reservation situated between Ponca Creek and the Niobrara River in northern Nebraska. The defining catastrophe of the Ponca's 19th century history did not occur on the battlefield, but rather within the negligent and cynical bureaucratic apparatus of the federal government. By 1868, the United States was desperate to end Red Cloud's war and appease the militarily dominant Lakota Sioux, who were effectively halting American expansion through the Powder River country. To achieve this, the United States negotiated the Treaty of Fort Laramie, in an administrative act that is frequently characterized in historical literature as an administrative blunder. Federal negotiators included the entirety of the guaranteed 96,000-acre Ponca Reservation within the newly delineated boundaries of the Great Sioux Reservation. However, historical evidence and subsequent analyses suggest this was more than a mere cartographic oversight. It was a pragmatic, albeit deeply unethical, geopolitical maneuver. A private arrangement essentially granted legally held Ponca land to the Lakota to secure their cooperation, blatantly violating the United States' 1865 treaty obligations to the peaceful Ponca Nation. The federal government unilaterally stripped the Ponca of their legal title to their own homelands without consultation, compensation, or consent. The consequences for the Ponca were immediate, terrifying, and dire. The Sioux, now backed by United States legal recognition of the territory, intensified their attacks on the Ponca villages. The Ponca were subjected to incessant raids, forcing them to abandon their wider hunting grounds and live in a state of perpetual fear and hardscrabble farming. Throughout the late 1860s and 1870s, combined with severe regional droughts and failed bison hunts, the Sioux threat pushed the Ponca to the absolute brink of starvation. Despite desperate pleas from Ponca leadership, the federal government, which was legally obligated by the 1865 treaty to provide military protection, offered little to no assistance, leaving the peaceful tribe completely defenseless against their hostile, government-armed neighbors. Faced with the untenable situation created by the 1868 Fort Laramie Treaty, the United States government faced a critical policy decision: either renegotiate with the powerful Sioux to correct the treaty error and restore Ponca lands, or forcibly remove the marginalized, defenseless Ponca to Indian territory around present-day Oklahoma. Policymakers chose the latter, prioritizing the appeasement of the Sioux and the broader goals of Western settlement over the legal and moral rights of the Ponca. In 1876, Congress officially listed the Ponca among several northern tribes slated for immediate removal to Indian territory. The Ponca leadership, however, did not submit passively. Following an inspection of the proposed lands in Indian territory, which the Ponca chiefs accurately assessed as a hot, rocky, and malarial environment entirely unsuitable for their traditional agricultural practices, the tribal leadership explicitly refused to consent to the move. They cited the legally binding protections of their earlier treaties, assuming that the law of the United States would protect them. When federal agents arrived in early 1877 to facilitate the relocation, they were met with unified tribal resistance. Consequently, the United States invoked military force. In the spring of 1877, under the threat of military gunpoint, a government order was issued on April 12th, and the forced removal of the Ponca began. The Ponca were driven from their ancestral homelands along the Niobrara River on a harrowing 55-day, 280-mile death march toward Oklahoma. The journey south was a logistical nightmare and a humanitarian disaster. The Ponca, already physically weakened by years of starvation and psychological stress from Sioux harassment, were subjected to brutal environmental conditions. They endured freezing spring rains, deep mud that mired their wagons, severe flooding, and profound exhaustion. Disease quickly permeated the traveling camp, striking down the most vulnerable members of the tribe. The tragic human toll of this forced march is deeply memorialized in Ponca oral tradition and local Nebraska history through specific, heartbreaking individual losses. On the trail near present-day Nellie, Nebraska, an 18-month-old girl named White Buffalo Girl, the daughter of Black Elk and Moonhawk, succumbed to what was believed to be pneumonia. Because the military forced the tribe to continue marching without delay, the grieving father secured a promise from the citizens of Neelig to maintain her grave. A local carpenter constructed a coffin, the townspeople buried her in their cemetery, and for generations, the community has faithfully honored that promise. Further south, the tragedy compounded. As the tribe traveled through Seward County, Nebraska, following the Big Blue River, Chief Standing Bear's daughter, Prairie Flower, perished on June 5, 1877. The very next day, June 6th, a devastating tornado struck the encampment, fatally injuring Standing Bear's granddaughter. The citizens of Milford, Nebraska buried both individuals in the Mount Pleasant Cemetery, marking the trail with the physical remnants of the Ponca diaspora. The arrival in the designated Indian territory, referred to by the Ponca as the Warm Country, brought no respite. Rather, it initiated a period of unimaginable grief and mortality. The relocation had been grossly mismanaged by the federal government. Upon their arrival in the summer of 1878, the Ponca found that the government had failed to provide adequate facilities, shelter, or the promised rations. Furthermore, because the tribe arrived in the intense heat of the late summer, the critical window for planting agricultural crops had long passed, guaranteeing an upcoming season of profound starvation. The ecological shock of the hot, humid Oklahoma climate introduced malaria and other foreign pathogens to the already physically depleted and malnourished population. The resulting mortality rate was staggering. Historical analyses indicate that nearly 158 Ponca individuals, representing approximately one-third of the entire tribal population, perished within the first 2 years of their forced settlement in Oklahoma. The survivors were largely incapacitated by illness, profound homesickness, and deep mourning for their lost relatives and their beloved ancestral lands along the Niobrara. By the bitter winter of 1878, the situation in Indian Territory had reached an agonizing nadir. Among the scores of dead was Bear Shield, the teenage son of Chief Standing Bear. Bear Shield's death, occurring in late December 1878, served as the emotional, cultural, and spiritual catalyst that would ultimately alter the legal framework of the United States. On his deathbed, Bear Shield made a final desperate plea to his father. He requested that his remains not be left in a strange land where his spirit would wander forever, but rather be returned and interred in the familiar, sacred earth of the Ponca homelands along the Niobrara River. To a traditional Ponca, burial in ancestral soil was inextricably linked to spiritual continuity in the afterlife. Standing Bear, bound by deep paternal devotion and profound cultural duty, promised to fulfill this dying wish. By the bitter winter of 1878, the situation in Indian Territory had reached an agonizing nadir. Among the scores of dead was Bear Shield, the teenage son of Chief Standing Bear. Bear Shield's death, occurring in late December 1878, served as the emotional, cultural, and spiritual catalyst that would ultimately alter the legal framework of the United States. On his deathbed, Bear Shield made a final desperate plea to his father. He requested that his remains not be left in a strange land where his spirit would wander forever, but rather be returned and interred in the familiar, sacred earth of the Ponca homelands along the Niobrara River. To a traditional Ponca, burial in ancestral soil was inextricably linked to spiritual continuity and the afterlife. Standing Bear, bound by deep paternal devotion and profound cultural duty, promised to fulfill this dying wish. Leaving a federal reservation in Indian Territory without explicit permission from federal agents was a strict violation of federal law at the time. Fully aware of the legal risks and the physical peril, Standing Bear and a contingent of approximately 65 followers, primarily women, children, and the elderly who were desperate to escape the malarial environment, departed Indian Territory in early January 1879. Carrying the bones of his deceased son, Standing Bear led his people on a grueling 500-mile, 40-day trek north across the frozen expanse of the Great Plains. By March 1879, the exhausted, starving, and destitute band reached the reservation of their linguistic and cultural relatives, the Omahas, in eastern Nebraska, seeking temporary refuge and assistance. However, the federal government swiftly retaliated against this act of defiance. The Secretary of the Interior, Carl Schurz, ordered General George Crook, commander of the military department of the Platte, to arrest the renegade band. Crook's military forces apprehended Standing Bear and his followers, incarcerating them at Fort Omaha Barracks with the explicit intent of forcibly marching them back to the lethal conditions of Indian Territory. The impending forced return of Standing Bear to Oklahoma catalyzed a profound crisis of conscience for General George Crook. Despite a long career defined by prosecuting Indian wars on behalf of the U.S. military, Crook was deeply moved by the tragic circumstances, the peaceful history of the Ponca, and the dignified resolve of the Ponca leader. Acting subversively against the very orders he was commanded to enforce, Crook delayed the deportation process, providing crucial time for a legal defense to be mounted. Seeking external intervention, Crook surreptitiously contacted Thomas Henry Tibbles, an outspoken abolitionist and assistant editor for the Omaha Daily Herald. Tibbles immediately recognized the profound humanitarian and constitutional implications of the situation. He extensively publicized the plight of the Ponca, generating massive public sympathy across the United States. The peaceful agrarian history of the Ponca, combined with Standing Bear's status as a grieving father, made their case highly palatable to Anglo-American sensibilities of the era, which were often hostile to more militant tribes. Tibbles subsequently recruited two prominent Omaha attorneys, John L. Webster and A.J. Poppleton, to represent Standing Bear pro bono. Together, they constructed a novel and radical legal strategy. They would sue General Crook, who happily acted as a friendly defendant, for a writ of habeas corpus to prevent the removal. Habeas corpus, a foundational element of English common law enshrined in the U.S. Constitution, permits anyone who believes they are being unlawfully detained to demand that the government justify their imprisonment before a court. The filing of this writ on behalf of an indigenous leader immediately sparked a constitutional crisis. The federal government, represented by the U.S. District Attorney, moved to dismiss the writ on chilling, deeply racist legal grounds. The government's core defense was predicated on the assertion that Native Americans were neither citizens nor persons within the meaning of United States law. Because they were not legally recognized as persons, the government argued, they possessed no legal standing to seek a writ of habeas corpus, and therefore the military had absolute, unchecked authority to detain, incarcerate, and relocate them at will without judicial oversight.